The years at Universal were really, truly Jack Arnold's salad days. This is when he really started understanding how to manipulate an audience and how to do trick effects and work with actors and balance story with action and so on. He got pegged as, you know, the guy who makes our science fiction pictures. On a studio hierarchy ladder, that's about down here. And he wanted, you know, like to climb up to, he makes some of our best westerns, or he did that picture with Maureen O'Sullivan, or, oh yeah, he's going to do that Henry Fonda picture. And they said, no. You're down here, you make those science fiction pictures. Very frustrating for him. By 1957, Jack Arnold was pretty tired of knocking off essentially lowercase movies for Universal.
By the late 50s, the studios were all having trouble. There was a lot of TV production, but less feature production. And so a lot of guys were moving into TV. Jack didn't get his contract renewed, and so he's looking for places to work.
Through Zug Smith, Jack Arnold went on elsewhere instead of just Universal. He did High School Confidential at MGM. Went over briefly to Paramount to do this a little 2-week picture for William Allen and so on. He was on his own, basically.
During this period in the late 50s, people were looking for work. Joseph Gershenson had been a music director, credited in a lot of films during the 50s at Universal, and he really wanted to be a producer. And he had advocated for this for so long that the studio executives thought, okay, fine, and they gave him a project to produce. And it didn't really result in him becoming a producer. But this was a film they didn't care much about. At the time that it was made, Monster on the Campus was supposed to be kind of like the very successful, very cheap AIP films like I Was a Teenage Werewolf, for example. So Universal, looking to make money, feature production down, a lot of competition from cheap independent features, little companies like AIP. So they attempted to do something like that. And so Monster on the Campus was supposed to be like I Was a Teenage Werewolf, low budget. Of course, the makeup was much better because they had they had the Westmores, but otherwise it was meant to be fairly formulaic. Arthur Franz, the leading man, is again a guy that you would see in a low-budget competition, like Atomic Submarine, for example, where he faces down a rather unlikely-looking Cyclops creature in a flying saucer in the North Pole. How odd is that?
Now, before your very eyes, see a man revert to a half-human anthropoid from the dawn of creation. A monster leaving behind a trail of death and destruction.
Oh, it's impossible. Nobody's got a footprint like that.
In the Universal film, it was still supposed to look kind of credible. They weren't trying to make it cheap and hokey looking like the average teenage fodder at the time, which they probably could have done and still made money with the film, but everyone there took it seriously. Jack took it seriously.
It's got some really shocking violence in it. I mean, stuff that even today is 60 years later, you go, whoa. And that's kind of neat. That delivered for 1958. But it was really kind of a one-off. Joseph Gershenson, I don't know why he wanted to produce anything like that. He was a really competent music director, and he had produced films before, 10 years before, in the 40s. I don't understand why he wanted that, but he did. And Jack always said he did it for him as a favor.
23 times John Gant had dueled with death and won. Always legally, always fairly.
Why didn't you kill me?
I wasn't paid to.
By the late 50s, the Western was really changing, and there was a movement away from formulas to what they sometimes call the psychological Western. And I think No Name on the Bullet is definitely one of those scripts. Starred Audie Murphy, who's a really interesting guy. He was actually the most decorated World War II soldier. He was a little guy, kind of cute features like Mickey Rooney or something, not quite as exaggerated, but was really a good actor. And if he was cast just right, always gave a compelling performance. Otherwise, what they were giving Jack to work with was all the formula stuff. He had the backlot Western Town. He had all their contract players, guys you've seen a million times, like Whit Bissell. But the script was really interesting. The gunman that's hired to come into town and do away with somebody is a deeply philosophic intellectual who never will pull his gun on people. They are actually bad people who will pull their gun on him first. And he's fast, and he will always defend himself and kill them. The question of what is good and what is evil, when is killing justified and so forth, is brought up in a very intelligent way. Jack was clearly aware of the subtleties in the script and brought out wonderful performances from all his actors.
Sorry, Hertel, but Mr. Hayes is another of the victims.
Hello, Bobby.
What's he doing here?
You know each other?
Yeah, well, not socially.
Answer me.
The bank has retained Mr. Christopher to protect its clients, Mr. Hayes.
Protect us? What are you, crazy? He's U.S. Justice Department.
Not anymore, Bobby. Not for a couple of years.
Get him out of here. You hear me? Swiss banks don't give out their clients' numbers. Not to nobody.
Okay, so you were more or less a freelancer at that point. And so some of the people that he knew, like Albert Zugsmith, were over at MGM, and so he went over there and made a couple of pictures. They're very much like his Universal pictures from the period, though. Studio work continued to decline in terms of feature films, but there was a lot of television being done throughout the 60s. Jack became very successful, not only as a television director, but television producer. Was very hard-pressed to find much feature work, but he did a few here and there during that period.
But he did it to stay working. He had 2 kids, one of whom, a daughter, was mentally handicapped, and he had to keep working. And he wasn't making much money at Universal doing science fiction pictures. That's not top-of-the-line work. You're making money, that's nice, you're paying the bills, you've got the house payment cleared and the kids have new, but it's not, that's not being rich, and that's not even being as wealthy as a guy who does regular films over at Warner Brothers or Paramount or whatever. If you've got any sort of a sense of wanting to get ahead in life, to get yourself and your wife and your kids, something better than they have right now, you have to think, well, what can I do next to get ahead in life, to take the next step? And what should I avoid doing so that I won't be drugged back down again? Went on to do major stuff. There was a TV special on that he directed, which was on all 3 of the major American networks at the same time. I mean, that's extraordinary. He, one of the stock directors for Mr. Lucky. What's interesting is that after having a career that was all over the place, he ended up back at Universal. For a long time, he was associated with the series It Takes a Thief.
He winds up there doing rather undistinguished television work. Things like, when I met him, he was doing The Love Boat, which, if you can imagine a more perfunctory direction than that, I can't. But he was, of course, meeting the exact expectations of what you wanted for something like that. Nonetheless, there were still a few people around there that remembered him, and he was treated very nicely. It was fun to go have lunch with him in the commissary, where he had, been dining since the early 50s.
Right, McGowan?
David Christopher.
That's right.
How about sharing some of this back home whiskey with me?
Beer is fine.
Waiter. Waiter. Bring my friend here a nice cold beer. Well, Davy, I've been wondering when you're going to get around to old Dwight. Herr Hertel tells me you're going to be my knight in shining armor and keep those bastards off my back.
Same message to the Internal Revenue Service?
You've been talking to someone about me, boy?
They volunteered the information.
You sure are a quiet one, Davy boy. But now don't you worry. I got me a deal simmering back in L.A. that'll set me flying.
He did also, during that period of television work at Universal, try to develop a feature project there. There was a very well-known matte painting artist who was probably the greatest ever, a guy named Albert Whitlock, who was sort of late in his career too. And Whitlock had in mind a sort of swan song, some sort of working for other people's projects, creating a project that would highlight his full abilities. And he knew Jack understood special effects and science fiction, and so together what they planned was a project that would, under normal circumstances, be impossible to do, that it would just be too expensive. It was an adaptation of the Conan Doyle novel, The Lost World. They were going to make it look like a very, very expensive film because of the clever way that they were going to use the matte paintings. And they had the whole thing worked out, scripted, storyboard, cast, and then Jack had reverses in his health and was unable to get insured. And Whitlock did not think that there was another director who could do the project, and it got permanently shelved. You know, one thing I loved about that project too was that to make it a viable melodrama, it needed a love interest, which was absent from the Conan Doyle novel and from the 1925 film version and the 1960 version. They added one, but it was terrible. They decided that Professor Challenger should have a daughter. And of course, this is a period film, and whom they had cast for this was a luscious, very young, very British, Jane Seymour. So there's sketches that show the way she would have looked in sort of a khaki a skirt coming down below the knees, boots, and a nipped waist with a white blouse and a pith helmet. You can imagine how fetching she would have looked in this, being menaced by man-eating plants and prehistoric monsters.
Although he went on to make films for another 30 years after he left Universal, these are the ones that people remembered. He resented it for a long time. He didn't want to talk about those because they were kind of beneath him. It's like, you know, the dirty secret that from high school that you don't want anybody to know about you. Oh yeah, I did those well. Yeah. But what people remembered were these magical monster movies that he did. It was, you know, this one-eyed 3D monster in an Arizona crater somewhere, and this scaly thing climbing onto the side of the boat, and this 50-foot tarantula coming over the rocks. That's what people remembered. Even to the end, after he'd been very ill and he'd lost a leg and you know, all sorts of things were wrong. He had offices there on the Universal lot, and by that time he had become the éminence grise of science fiction, the gray eminence. He'd finally come to accept it. That there was an entire generation or two that have come afterward that really liked those movies that he had dismissed for so long. And he accepted it. That's cool.